Okay, as promised, this is lesson one in a three-part series on how to go from AutoCAD out to PDFs into Photoshop and some quick techniques in Photoshop to render your plan drawing. So this one is just going to cover how you set things up in AutoCAD and publish them to create a series of individual PDFs that represent groups of information in your drawing. So let's jump over to these tabs here. So the way I've isolated this in mind, Hardscape, basically everything that hits the ground plane. This makes it easy. There's no hatching, there's no patterns, there's no trees, no contour lines, nothing in the way. This just allows me to use the magic wand in Photoshop to select any of these contiguous areas in here, which is really useful. So in my case, it's got the sidewalks, the roads, the curbs, these dividers for all the planting beds, the fountain area, the walls, the seats, anything that touches the ground, stairs, all that information could be isolated onto one layer. Now, the way you do that, I will cover that in just a second. Let's take a look at some of the other layers first, and we'll go back and I'll show you how to set that up. I have hatching isolated on a separate layer because I want to have that available for Photoshop for the rendering, but I don't really want that in the way because the magic wand has a tough time with all this detail. I've separated the vegetation out into deciduous trees, ornamental trees, which again, these black birch over here could be separated out on another layer. These are like dogwoods and redbuds, and these are somewhat different. But again, for this rendering, you're not going to have these in there anyway. You're just going to have these lower ones, so that'll work fine. Large shrubs, and then small shrubs. And you can see that contains a lot of information. But again, just gives me an easy way to set the color for these things one group at a time. And because even in Photoshop, once they're on a layer, I can easily select one of these groups. If you want to make some of these different, you can do that within a single layer in Photoshop easily. Okay, so how do we get to there? How do we create these layouts that have different types of information? So I'm going to go back to this layout, which hasn't been set up yet. And the way you do that, first thing you do is set up a single layout that's configured the way you want it. So I'm going to right click on the layout tab, close this again so you can see that, right click, choose page setup manager, and then I'm going to choose modify. And the first thing I want to do is pick a DWG to PDF or Adobe PDF, either one of those. That tells AutoCAD what device I'm plotting to, and it configures the pages based on that device. Next, I'm going to choose my paper size, which is ANSI B 11 by 17. I'm going to choose my monochrome plot style, which turns all those color lines to black and white. And by the way, if you choose this and check display plot styles, and you go back to the AutoCAD file and you still see color, that's because you've used custom colors. And I'll show you what I mean by that in a second. So I'm going to click OK, close. So in this case, you can see that it's all gone black and white. If you see color, that's probably because if we go to our layer properties and you click on one of these colors, if the color comes up, if this color dialog box comes up and you're in the true color mode, then the plot style will not override that because it's not one of the index colors. You need to assign the layers from this index color file. Then if you choose monochromatic CTB, anything in this index color file, this matrix here, will be turned into black lines. But if you pick something from here, it's a unique custom color, that plot style doesn't contain it, so it won't turn it. So if you see color, that's probably why. It's either that reason or you've actually assigned custom colors to the objects themselves and they're not set to by layer, because that's again how the CTB works. So make sure every line in your drawing is assigned by layer, as you see up here at the top. You want it by layer. You don't want to actually click on this and pick a color. You want it by layer. And then make sure that you've used a color from that index color file to set that up. That's the key thing. Okay, so if you have a problem, that's where it's going. So now you can see I've got my 11 by 17 set up. Remember, these dashed lines are actually the printable area. So I'm going to expand my viewport just inside that printable area. And the next thing I'm going to do is go down here, and I think we talked about in class that a 1:20 ratio. Now I have the entire 2 block area, so I'm going to move it over, and you can see for you all, you're doing one side or the other, and you're actually not dealing with everything up above there, but you get the idea. We can fit it within that area. So what I want to do is set up a single layout, set it up for the right driver, Adobe PDF or DWG to PDF, set it up monochromatic CTB, display plot styles, make sure your colors are displaying as they should, and get the drawing scale picked to 1 to 20. And then once you have that set up, you're ready to make copies. So I can call this, I'm going to right click on that, rename that, and call that master. Okay, and now I can click on the master tab, right click, choose move or copy, and I'm going to choose master, create a copy, and it will just put master 2 right to the left or right of it here. So I'm going to click on master 2, I'm going to choose rename, and I'll call that Hardscape. Okay. Okay. Let's call that Hardscape 2. Okay, so we've got that. Now I can go to that tab, and you can see that this has a lot more than the Hardscape on it. So in order to set this viewport up, what I need to do is first I just double click in here and activate that viewport. And then I want to pull my layer properties up. And I'll try and expand this a little bit so you can see it. Okay, now if you look from the names of the layers over here, and then you've got the columns for on, off, freeze, thaw. So that controls things globally in model space and layout space. But you also have another column, and you may have to expand this column out. It might be really small. But over here to the right, you have something called VP, which stands for Viewport Freeze. And this is new viewport. But this means that once I've activated this viewport within the layout, I can control what shows up in this particular viewport. And it won't change what shows up in model space. It only affects what's in this viewport. So in this case, for example, hatching to all these plants, I can click that and I can select them all, and it turns all of them off. So if I move this over, you can see that it turned a whole bunch of that information off. I scroll down to my tree layers. I can select them all and just click once, and it will hide all those. So let's close this up for a second. Sorry. There we go, VP Freeze, and all those are turned off. So I can come back in here and find my contours, turn those off. So now you can see I'm starting to get what I want. Now there's a texture on the swimming pool here. These are okay if I want to leave them showing, that's all right. And that stuff up there doesn't really matter. Just keep that centered in there. So that is, don't know what layer that's on. Here we go, pools. There we go, I turned that off. So you know how you organize your own particular layers, and you'll just have to go in there. But the key is that you just use the VP Freeze, and you freeze all the layers that you don't want to see in this particular layout, which in this case is Hardscape. And then I double click outside and I'm back in layout space. And so that's basically set up just the way my original Hardscape was set up. So you do that same process for each of those layers that you want to separate. And again, think about Photoshop. If you want to be able to select things easily by using that, use the magic wand, click outside, inverse the selection, kind of shrink wrap it onto those things. You don't want evergreen trees and deciduous trees and ornamental trees and all mixed together. You just want to separate those pieces out into logical groupings. You don't have to separate every single kind of tree. You noticed in the layers properties I had a lot of specific shrub names labeled in here, although they have fairly similar symbols. I just grouped all the shrubs together. That's fine. This is an illustrative plan. It's not a planting plan. You don't have to isolate every single different thing. You just want to make sure that you can work with those. So that's the way you do that. You double click activate a viewport, pull up your layer properties, select the layers that you want to hide or show, and you use the VP freeze column to turn those layers or to freeze and thaw them off and on so that they're not there. And it won't affect anything in another viewport. So you can see over here, I still have these trees, shrubs, deciduous trees here. It only affects what's in that viewport, but you have to double click to activate it. And then you can click down here, double click outside to go back to paper space. Okay, so that's how you set things up. It just makes things a lot easier in Photoshop because we can load this series of PDF files for each layout as separate layers in Photoshop, and it just makes the job a whole lot easier. Now, to get them out of AutoCAD, what you want to do is, if you don't have your menus showing, it's probably the easiest way, just click on this little pop-up here and go down and choose, it will say Show Menu Bar here, and then go to the File menu and choose Publish. Now, this will pop up with all the layouts, including model space. So I'm going to take model space, select it, right click, choose remove. I've got this copy, I'm going to remove that. Got another layout, going to remove that. So this is, and I don't need the master, I'll remove that. So I've got hardscape, hatching, deciduous trees, ornamental trees, large shrubs, small shrubs. So you basically want to isolate all the layouts. You can have other ones listed down here that you don't want to publish. You just have to take them out of the list by right-clicking on them and saying remove. Second thing you need to do is come up here and choose plotter named and page setup. You want to choose PDF. And that tells AutoCAD what you're plotting to. And then you want to go over here to publish options. And if you remember from class, I said I would just uncheck prompt for name. It will just give the default names based on the layouts. And then uncheck multi-sheet file. If this is checked, it will put all those different layout PDFs in a single PDF document, which you can take apart, but we don't want it that way. We want individual sheets. And so we're just going to use the defaults, set this up, and you can click on the browse and decide where you want this. I have a folder named PDFs for 2015. So I'm just going to select that. Again, make a folder and put them all in a single folder. It just makes it easier to find them when you get to Photoshop. So I'm going to select that and click OK. And then usually I uncheck publish in background just because you can see it happening. It doesn't take that long. If it asks you if you want to save the current list of sheets, I would just say no. You don't have to worry about it. And it will go through this process, and you'll see the layouts change in the background. It's publishing a PDF for each one of those. And it lets me know that there's no errors or warnings found here. So if I minimize this for a second, I go to PDFs 2015, you can see it just generated each of these files based on the name of the layout. And those are what I'm going to use to import into Photoshop. So that's the first step, working in AutoCAD. You want to create a master layout, the right sheet size, get it so it displays correctly in black and white. And once you've created that, you can right-click, move or copy, make copies of that, and then each one of those copies, you just go into your layer properties, and you can see here in this case, the Viewport Freeze. Well, first I have to activate it. Double-click on that, pull this up. It's really important. Now you can see that almost everything is off except for these hatching patterns. Everything else in this list has been turned off. And that's what gives me just the hatching and no lines. Double click outside, deciduous trees, same thing. We're going to go in, activate the viewport, click on layer properties, use the VP freeze column to turn the layers off and on that you want to see isolated within that particular viewport. And then once you're done, show your menus and use the file publish command to output those into separate PDF files. All right, that's the end of the first step. The next step, I'll talk about importing into Photoshop, setting up the layers and the layer groups, and then the last one will be about actually looking at the rendering styles.